November is Big Data Strategy Month at MetaScale. We are dedicating this month to helping IT and business leaders understand the technology, talent, and solutions needed for developing a successful big data strategy. My name is Nathan Nichols, Marketing and Business Operations Manager here at MetaScale. Welcome to this very special webcast with Jeff Kelly of Wikibon, and thank you for joining us as we kick off Big Data Strategy Month with a discussion on overcoming common big data barriers. Joining us today are Jeff Kelly, Principal Research Contributor and Lead Big Data Analyst at Wikibon, and Ankur Gupta, General Manager at MetaScale. Jeff will be sharing some of his latest research on the big data market, followed up by Ankur discussing customer trends that we are seeing, along with ways to overcome some common big data challenges. We will conclude today's webcast with a Q&A session with Jeff and Ankur, so be sure to submit your questions at any time during the session using the chat feature. Before I pass things over to Jeff, I'd like to thank Jeff and the folks at Wikibon for joining us today to share their latest research. For those not familiar, Wikibon is an open community for sharing IT and business knowledge. Wikibon.com is a leading source for information on big data, and I encourage all of you to join the community if you haven't already. With that, I'm pleased to pass things over to Jeff. Jeff?
Nathan, thanks so much for that kind introduction, and thanks everybody for joining us today. Today we're going to talk a little bit about some of the findings from our recent research around the big data market. We're going to delve into the landscape out there in terms of what's happening on the ground with practitioners, what led to the current environment we're in today, and reveal some insights around our most recent survey of big data practitioners, identifying some of the biggest challenges and barriers to big data success that they are running up against as they look to leverage these new approaches to data. So I think to start, I think it's important to understand how we got here. And the reality is, and anybody who reads the Wall Street Journal or watches CNBC understands that the industry heavyweights are under pressure. Oracle continues to miss on earnings and revenue. Teradata has lost almost $3 billion in market cap over the last year. SAP, we continue to hear about SAP trying to figure out how HANA is going to fit into the data management architecture. And meanwhile, while these industry heavyweights are being challenged, we're seeing the big data ecosystem simply explode. If any of you were at the most recent Hadoop World Conference, or maybe participated at the Hadoop Summit over the summer, you know that the number of vendors out there in the big data ecosystem is just enormous and continues to grow. Meanwhile, we're hearing from practitioners through the Wikibon community that enough is enough. They are and have been challenged with their traditional data warehouse environments for many years now. As one data warehouse practitioner told us in a recent conversation, our data warehouse is like a snake swallowing a basketball. In short, they continue to try to use traditional technologies to get more and more value out of their data, but they're running up against challenges around scalability, affordability, and performance. And frankly, we hear that practitioners are simply quite challenged in this regard. And if we look back, really, the enterprise data warehouse, from our perspective, has not lived up to its promise. We have heard consistently over the last 10, 15 years from the enterprise data warehouse market, marketing, and from related players in that market, the business intelligence market as well. A number of promises, things like promises to deliver a 360-degree view of the customer, promises like a single source of truth for all your data needs inside the enterprise. We often hear about self-service business intelligence or BI for the masses, the idea of extending business intelligence and data visualization capabilities throughout the enterprise to everyday business users beyond just power users. And really the most important promise we continue to hear from this community is around providing actionable real-time insights related to your data. I think it's clear from what we're hearing from practitioners in the Wikibon community that the enterprise data warehouse has not lived up to these promises over the years. Now, that's not to say there hasn't been some value. Anybody out there who, and I imagine there's quite a few of you out there who are data management practitioners, and you know that the data warehouse has delivered significant value related to things like compliance, and regulatory issues. There are certainly some CFOs out there that are quite happy that they've invested in data warehouse technology to help them on that front over the years. Still, we think that largely the promises made by this enterprise data warehouse market haven't been lived up to. So the next question then, of course, is will the big data ecosystem, the big data market, and big data technologies live up to the hype? Can they live up to these promises? What you're looking at here is Wikibon's big data market revenue forecast. Wikibon was the first research and advisory firm to put forth a market sizing effort around big data. It's important to point out that this big data market forecast includes a number of technologies that make up what could be called the big data stack. Admittedly, that stack continues to evolve with all the technology improvements we're seeing in the underlying technology, but nevertheless, this is where we see the market today and moving into 2015 and beyond. So currently, we believe that the big data market will hit $28.5 billion in revenue in 2014, and we see that growing year over year to $38.4 billion in 2015, topping $45 billion in revenue in 2016, and eventually topping $50 billion in 2017. This is a revenue side forecast focused on the revenue being driven by technology and service providers in the big data space. And we'll get into a little bit more detail about just what all those different technology components are. But of course, two of the most important ones, and what some folks might consider quote unquote real big data, if you will, for lack of a better term, are Hadoop and NoSQL. So Wikibon views Hadoop and NoSQL as two of the foundational technologies of what we're calling the new digital fabric. The digital fabric includes other technologies and approaches, most importantly cloud, DevOps, and some other components, but the idea behind the digital fabric is that rather than vertically integrated stacks of technology, services, and best practices, vertically integrated for specific markets, specific vertical industries, there is a horizontal digital fabric being built out that is enabling multiple vendors from different industries to leverage the new fabric to deliver new innovative services to their customers. Big data is a very important part of that fabric, and digging into big data a little bit, Hadoop and NoSQL are two of the foundational technologies to the digital fabric. We believe that for a number of reasons, but among them, certainly that the majority of innovation that we're seeing around data-driven applications, data-driven frameworks is coming out of the Hadoop and NoSQL communities. As you know, they're driven in part by an active and vocal open source community, as well as a market or ecosystem of vendors that have arisen to commercialize some of the technology and help support these deployments in enterprise deployments. So what you're looking at here is a forecast for Hadoop and NoSQL specifically around software and services. It's important to note that this is a sub-segment of the larger big data market forecast that I just shared a moment ago. So in 2014, we forecast the Hadoop and NoSQL markets combined close to a 50-50 split. Hadoop is a slightly bigger market, we believe, than NoSQL at this point. But the combined market will reach $1.375 billion in 2014, growing to top $3.3 billion by 2017. Now again, if you compare that to the larger big data market, it's a relatively small slice of the market, but nevertheless, we feel an important one because of the innovation coming out of this community and out of these markets. Now, as I mentioned a moment ago, there's quite a ecosystem emerging around big data, around Hadoop, around NoSQL, and the related technologies, in the case of Hadoop and NoSQL, sub-projects, sub-Apache projects that are related to these technologies. You've also got traditional data management companies, like some of the ones I mentioned at the top of the webcast. Those that are feeling the pressure from these new approaches are attempting to adapt in different ways to this new world that is dominated by scale-out frameworks using commodity hardware with a heavy dose of open-source software. This is quite a different approach than traditional vendors such as SAP and Oracle and Teradata and others traditionally have taken, but they're all trying to adapt and find their place in this market. Meanwhile, as I mentioned, a community of an ecosystem of startups, both focused on things like Hadoop distributions, most notably with Cloudera and MapR and Hortonworks, but as well, you've got NoSQL vendors, you've got data integration vendors, you've got data transformation, data wrangling vendors are starting to get a little bit hot. You've got security companies, services vendors. So there's just a wide swath of technologies and vendors that are playing in this market. And of course, that can lead to some level of confusion among enterprise practitioners whose job it is to actually implement and make decisions around technology procurement, picking the best systems for their particular use cases. Another important group of vendors I should mention, of course, are the cloud vendors, Amazon Web Services, Google, and others that are betting a lot on this market as well. So the big data market, in short, is really the equivalent of the Wild West today. We do see this market over time consolidating. Simply put, we don't believe that the big data market can support the number of vendors that are currently out there. The slide you're looking at has got quite a few logos on it, but we probably could have filled out 3 or 4 more slides with the logos of all the companies that are playing in this market. And it's hard to think of a technology provider that doesn't have a play in the big data market in one way or another. But we do expect there will be some consolidation in this market over the next several years. But in the shorter term, this confusing landscape is going to continue to be a challenge for practitioners to overcome. So what's actually happening in the enterprise? So Wikibon recently conducted a survey of its community of big data practitioners. It's important, again, to point out that this survey was focused on early adopters. That is, we focus specifically on those practitioners that are at the very least in the evaluation phase as it relates to big data analytic projects. So keep that in mind when we're reviewing some of the data. But based on our findings from the survey, we found that 41% of big data early adopters are still in that evaluation phase. That is, evaluating use cases, evaluating vendors and technologies, evaluating internal capabilities relative to how they would leverage big data should they start certain projects. 28% are in the pilot or proof of concept phase. They've got a project underway where they're testing and building new applications, prototyping applications, and testing use cases. And 31% of big data early adopters are currently in production, meaning they are supporting some type of application in production that's supporting a business use case, a business process that is impacting the organization's bottom line on a day-to-day basis. So while it is encouraging to see that 31% are actually in production, we still believe that this illustrates that big data is still in its early days. We sometimes, in the echo chamber that is Silicon Valley and the big data community, think we're further along than we are, but the reality is we're still very early days in terms of the mainstream enterprise taking advantage of some of these big data tools and technologies and approaches. As part of our survey, we also asked about, just what are those tools and technologies that are in use? And what came back were some really interesting findings, and I think illustrates and is another data point to support the fact that these are complex platforms, complex architectures that organizations need to put together to really leverage big data. So you'll notice the first two, or I should say bottom two, technologies in use in the graphic here are Hadoop and NoSQL databases at 36 and 38% respectively in use among our big data practitioner respondents. Again, not a huge number relative to some of the other technologies, but again, important because this is really where we see some of the innovation coming out of, and we believe these are foundational technologies. But if you look at the top of this chart, you'll notice, second from the top anyway, you'll see conventional, quote unquote, data warehouses in use supporting big data projects. That might seem, an interesting finding considering what we mentioned earlier, that The reason a lot of enterprise practitioners are looking to these new technologies, looking to new approaches like Hadoop, like NoSQL, are because these conventional, traditional data management tools and technologies are buckling under the strain of big data. But the reality is, for the foreseeable future, these traditional tools, that includes data integration tools used by 52%, data visualization tools used by 42%, these traditional tools are going to play an important role in big data projects. And what this speaks to is, again, the complexity of deployments. This is not a situation where you're going to simply flip a switch and big data works. You need to put together multiple technologies, multiple tools, integrate data data processing and pipelines to get data to the right place at the right time. So these are really complex deployments using multiple types of tools and technologies that weren't necessarily designed to work together. And this is an area where we're still seeing a lot of challenges for practitioners. Which relates to return on investment. In a recent survey, we asked big data practitioners to rate what they expected to get in terms of an ROI on their investment in big data technology and services. And what we heard are that big data practitioners are expecting big things. And this is very much in line with what we believe to be the case in terms of where the real value of big data is going to be driven from, and that is from the practitioner side versus the vendor side. We believe the majority of value in the big data space is going to be generated by the practitioners, those who are putting this technology to use. But back to the slide, you'll see that the average return on investment expected from our big data practitioner survey respondents was $3.50 for every dollar spent. So that's a significant return expected on their investment. The reality is, when we ask them, well, what are you actually getting today? And the reality is that they're only getting about 55 cents on the dollar for their current investments. Now, part of this is, of course, related to the fact that many are still in proof of concept and evaluation phase. They may have made some investments but aren't putting them to full use yet. But again, the reality is this stuff is hard. Organizations are still trying to figure out where everything fits in terms of not just the technology, but also the people and process issues related to big data. Making big data successful requires a number of different initiatives within the organization, again, from technology, from people and process issues, from cultural issues, and I think these are some of the issues that practitioners are running up against as they deploy big data and are running up against the reality that this stuff is really challenging. So as part of our recent practitioner survey, we asked specifically around, well, what are those challenges? What are those barriers that you're running up against? And they can be broken down into really kind of two categories. One would be around data and technology-related challenges. I'll go into those details in just a moment. The other is around people and process issues. But what I think really was striking, and again, we'll get into this in just a moment, was the disalignment between IT and the business when it comes to judging the success of big data projects. This is not new or necessarily unique to big data. Aligning IT and the business is a challenge for any number of areas, but it's rearing its head in the big data space, and we think the level of the gap between the two groups is striking, and was one of the reasons we're seeing not as much success in the early days of big data as maybe we expected. So getting to some of those technology and data-related challenges that we're seeing, that we're hearing from practitioners, number one on the list was data transformation. Our survey respondents and members of the Wikibon community that we talk with on a regular basis time and again tell us that transforming data into suitable format for analysis, for processing, is one of the biggest challenges they face. You hear this from data scientists all the time. They spend 80% of their time getting data into a format suitable for analysis, and only about 20% of the time doing the actual analysis. This is a challenge that, again, I think becomes a much more real, much more concrete when you start to move into production deployments, but even in POC and pilot projects, we're seeing this as a challenge for practitioners. Second on the list is much more of a challenge when you're talking about production deployments, and that's integrating big data with existing infrastructure. Organizations have spent multi-millions of dollars on data management infrastructure, be it data warehouses, data integration tools, the hardware supporting these platforms, and of course they want to leverage those to their fullest extent. To do that, you've got to integrate these new approaches with existing infrastructure. Also, you've got data movement between the two that needs to be arranged, and that's a challenge that practitioners continue to come up against, but specifically becomes a big issue when you're talking about moving to production scale and really building not just production workloads, but really an enterprise-grade strategy around big data. Third on the list, related to both number one and number two, is integrating multiple data sets. Data integration is always a challenge, has been in the traditional world of data management and continues to be in the big data space, not just getting data from point A to point B, but also dealing with the data quality issues related to data integration. Having covered this market for close to 10 years now in one form or another, I know in the more traditional world, if you will, even five years ago, there was still quite a bit of hand coding going on when it came to data integration. When you get to big data environments, that challenge is just exacerbated by the volume of data, by the different types of data sources and structure of the data. It becomes even more of a challenge. Maintaining performance at scale. Now this makes a lot of sense when you think about moving to production grade workloads. It's one thing to build an application on Hadoop in a POC, testing it against small volumes of data, but when you move that to production, you're talking multiple terabytes, potentially petabytes of data running in production, not to mention large numbers of concurrent users hitting the system. Clearly this is a challenge that organizations are struggling with. And finally, and this is one I'm sure you've heard about, is a lack of skilled big data practitioners, one of the bigger challenges that organizations face out there. Of course, in McKinsey's famous paper outlining the lack of data scientists and other analysts to support big data analytics, that's well known, but there's other areas of big data where we lack practitioners, and that includes application development, and it also includes operations and IT support. And when you talk about some of the people and process issues, again, some of these you'll recognize from kind of your more traditional data management worlds. Getting stakeholders to agree on things like data definitions and objectives of projects continues to be a challenge in the big data world, just as it was in the traditional world of data management, data warehousing, and business intelligence. Number two is very interesting. Selling the value of big data analytics to end users continues to be a challenge. And it's interesting because what we find is there tends to be support among C-level executives for moving to more data-driven decision-making in the organization. So the top-down support for big data analytics projects seems to be there. The challenge we find, based on conversations with members of the Wikibon community, is getting the rank and file, the business users, to actually adopt new methods of decision-making that big data analytics supports. Change is hard, and when you get on the ground talking to frontline workers who are being asked to change the way they do their job, maybe they've been doing their job the same way for years or decades, that's when you get into a change management challenge, and that's one that technology alone can't solve that equation. And then of course, compliance and privacy concerns, always an issue when you're dealing with customer data. This is not something that's going to go away anytime soon. It's going to require a larger conversation beyond simply the kind of big data community to include the wider population. We hear about concerns around privacy relative to the use of social media. I think the public at large is starting to awaken to some of the issues related to sharing data on these social networks and what that means and how enterprises and even governments are using that data. So this is something, again, it's not necessarily an issue that technology can solve, and it's going to require a larger conversation among the different constituents in the big data community. And now I want to get to what I mentioned earlier, this disconnect between IT and the business. So as part of our most recent survey of big data practitioners, we asked them to rate the relative success of their big data analytics projects. Now, when you break that down by type of respondent, when you look at the IT practitioners who responded to our survey, they were much more likely to say that they've gotten the full value of their investment in big data technology and services than the business side. It was 60% plus of IT practitioners believed they were getting the full value of their investment in big data versus the business. Less than 20% of business practitioners believed the same, that they were getting the full value from their big data investments. Now, there are a number of theories around this, why this is, but what I think is happening here is you're seeing IT and business judge the success based on different criteria. You're seeing IT being tasked with standing up things like Hadoop clusters, getting the systems up and running, loading data into these new platforms, making sure they're highly available. And in a lot of cases, when that job is done, they're checking a box and saying, okay, we have successfully deployed big data. On the business side, they've got a much different set of requirements. They're not interested in the infrastructure, and a lot of business users don't even know what Hadoop is. What they're interested in are getting insights from their data assets. That requires a very different set of technologies and approaches than simply standing up the infrastructure. So there's definitely a disconnect between these two groups. Part of it you would expect anytime a new form of technology emerges on the scene, it's going to be that the initial focus is going to be on the infrastructure and getting systems up and running, and then moving it on to the business and actually getting the value out of it comes next. But the fact that the disconnect is so striking leads us to believe that this is a larger issue when it comes to big data. Nevertheless, as I mentioned earlier, we do believe that big data practitioners will create exponentially more value than big data vendors. We fundamentally believe that the real value in this market are practitioners in healthcare, in energy, in manufacturing, in retail, in pharmaceuticals, applying big data analytics approaches, technologies, and tools to solve some of business and society's big problems. And practitioners themselves believe this. When we asked practitioners that responded to our survey, these are early adopters again, but nevertheless, I think an important group, to describe their attitude relative to big data analytics. A remarkable 46% that they believe big data analytics is the new source of competitive advantage and will be fundamental to their businesses. An equal number, 46%, believe that big data analytics will be an important complement to their existing data warehouse and business intelligence practices. Now, if you add those two up, that's fully 90% plus of big data practitioners believe that big data is going to be extremely important to their organizations, if not critical to their future success. For those reasons, and also because if you look at big data project drivers, you'll notice that 55% of practitioners are looking at big data to not just to save money, to find operational efficiencies, for example, but also to increase revenue, to find new ways, new lines of business, identifying upsell, cross-sell opportunities. And when you look at their drivers that way, you understand that this is not a tactical tool or set of technologies for these organizations. These are transformational approaches to their business. When you take these two data points, we believe that, again, practitioners will create exponentially more value than vendors, and they believe it as well. But of course, if you go back to the comment I made earlier around the lack of ROI and the challenges related to architecting systems around big data and the different tools and technologies that need to be melded together to form a cohesive platform, it's not surprising that we find that most practitioners are looking for guidance from professional services firms. They're looking for guidance not just around the technical challenges, but also around just some of the very basic issues around what use cases should we tackle first. How is this going to impact the way we govern data and the way we run our business? What are the people and process issues we need to deal with? So it's not surprising, and we do encourage members of the Wikibon community to look at professional services firms who have experience in this space to help them understand how best to leverage big data in their organization. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to Ankur to continue with the webcast.
Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate it. Really valuable information. At MetaScale, we think Wikibon is a natural partner to us because they provide very real enterprise-based information. So this is a good segue for us to introduce you to to MetaScale, the company. Give us 1 second while we change the capabilities here. Okay, MetaScale. So MetaScale, for those who do not know about it, we are a company, big data company that was born out of a Fortune 100 company, Sears Holdings Corporation. Our team was born out of Sears, the same team that managed several petabytes of environment, a very large, complex environment, big data environment at Sears and now many other enterprises. So our experience is very real. While we are a vendor, we are a very enterprise-focused vendor that was not only born from an enterprise, but also continue to use open source tool to help other enterprises with pain points that we have seen before. So our experience is very real, and the tools and technologies that we use are primarily focused around the key challenges that organizations face and how to solve those, and many of those what Jeff talked about today. So some of the enterprising challenges, classic enterprise challenges that we face, and as we talk to many IT managers and CIOs regularly, we hear those very similar challenges. As we all know, our lives are becoming more and more digital, and this is essentially bombarding the amount of data in our daily lives. And so are the organizations that are wanting to make a better use of the data that is coming to them from various sources. As you see, this has led to an era of big data that I'll show you in the next few slides. But the challenges with that growing data volume is how do you manage the data? How do you collect the data? How do you source it? How do you store it? How do you make sense of it? And obviously, the cost, there is not more money flowing in the business to manage all that. While the costs are escalating, your budgets are not really growing up. And this growing amount of data is leading to ETL complexities, latency in data. And while these are the challenges that IT face, but business continues to demand more and more. So as Jeff said before, there is generally a huge gap between what business wants and what IT can deliver. And that classic enterprise challenges is across the organization is what we have seen, which leads us to this era of big data where your traditional tools and technologies, not that they could not handle the large amount of data, it's just that they could not handle it with the efficiency and the cost effectiveness that today's open source tools could do. So with this amount of data, as we have laid out here in the cost, complexity, and collection, with your traditional tools, there was no single point of truth. Data was coming from so many sources, and we are all aware of data silo problems and analytics and such that. So as the enterprise data hub, which is becoming more and more of a buzzword, and many of the organizations are using it. So while Jeff said that it's been into broken promises, what we have also seen is when you try to get results in a short term, you may not see the results very quickly. It is what we have seen with our parent organization and other enterprises where we have implemented enterprise data hub. It's a journey with number of sources that are growing in your organization. It's important to bring them all together, and that could slowly lead you to the ultimate benefit of using an enterprise data hub where all your sources are putting data at one place and you're doing analytics on top of that single source of truth. But obviously it does not happen in a short period of time. It is a journey, so it's really important that you do it right from the get-go. And if you want to see results in a short term, chances are that it may result into some disappointments. There are multiple capabilities that are required for an enterprise adoption, and we have listed out quite a few of those. So as you've seen in an organization, it's really hard for an organization to have all of these capabilities at one place. You have to have the right tools, technology, but most importantly, the talent in place with various skill sets to be able to manage this large amount of data and analytics on top of it. It really requires, the whole big data implementation requires long-term strategic vision. And that's where we talked to a number of organizations and helped them achieve the same. They may get one or two results quickly by implementing big data tools and technologies, but essentially what are you trying to accomplish? What are your use cases? What is your long-term goal? It's really important to have that long-term vision in mind from the get-go before you jump into doing something. A lot of time what happens is businesses and big data becoming a big buzzword, organizations are kind of pressed by this growing noise around big data, and they try to get into doing something quickly and sometimes result into disappointment. So without having a long-term strategy, it could possibly lead to that. So it's important that this complex eco-environment, that you have the right tools, right talent, and most importantly, the right use case in place before you jump into it. And this slide is similar to what Jeff had shown before, but what we have done here, this is MetaScale's version of various layers that are involved in implementing data, a large amount of data, and making sense of it. There are a number of distribution. As you go from left to right, you will see from open source to more and more commercial, the multiple layers that are involved. So you need to, as we talk to more and more organizations, they are looking for a different tools and technology in the different layers. What is the right tool where you can consume data on top of the Hadoop cluster that's out there and then make sense of it? What should I use for semantics? What should I use for security across each layer? What are the different integration layers? What are the different sources of data that are coming to us? So it's really important for organizations to think through the right tools and technology at each layer. They should really understand what are the capabilities that are out there that can help them build this whole ecosystem of creating the right big data implementation in place, so they start to see results quickly, but most importantly, effectively, so they don't run into big data implementation failure or achieving partial results, as actually one of the Wikibon results laid out before. So what we are seeing in terms of trends, MetaScale has been in existence for about 2 years now, and we've been talking to a number of customers. So even though while we were born out of a retail organization, we have had customers in financial domain, healthcare, technology, and such. And we continue to talk a large number of organizations, including retail and such. What we have seen is there are two kinds of organizations. One that have not yet started in their big data implementation at all, and they continue to ask for more and more education, then continue to get buy-in from businesses and such. And then there are organizations who have already implemented some sort of big data tools and technologies in production, whether it's Hadoop or NoSQL or a combination of these tools. So the organizations that have not yet started, they continue to take more time in what we have seen. They continue to ask for more details. They continue to wait for others to do it first before they get into it. While the organizations that have implemented the big data tools and technologies, they're asking for more. So there are a number of companies where we have implemented Hadoop, and we did it over 12 months ago. And last 12 months or so, we have implemented several additional tools, including NoSQL databases, tools for real-time integration such as Storm, Kafka, Cassandra, NoSQL databases such as Cassandra, MongoDB, HBase, and such. So we see growing demand from the companies who have already kind of tasted the success in big data area, and then there are organizations who have not really implemented and continue to take time. But the time taken with those companies who are in the initial phase or who continue to ask for more details or continue to educate their teams, that time is also shrinking. Last year, what we saw, a number of organizations were asking for more details, and this year we've seen that companies are looking to do something. They're either jumping on their POC plan, they're laying out details that are more concrete with very identification of use case, and implementation of the same is growing from what we saw last year. And so once they do a POC or two, they quickly think about jumping into production. But again, that time, as Jeff said in his note, that the big data is still in early stage. Companies, even though they see success in the POC, they're not quickly jumping into the POC environment. So because the organization may have made investment in other traditional tools and technology, so it's really important that they do the implementation of big data tools correctly, and for that it's important that they get the buy-in from the right businesses, right IT and whatnot. So it's taking considerable long time than what we would want them to. Industries that are adopting big data tools and technologies, as I said, while we were born out of retailers, a retail organization, we continue to talk to a large number of retail organizations, but we are also hearing, seeing trend in terms of adoption of big data within banking, healthcare, manufacturing, media, and entertainment. So all of these industries where they get data from many sources, and it's important that they make decisions based on data analytics. So in an insurance world, it's important that they understand that they can utilize the data coming from various sources to predict a disaster before it happens, and can predict or can lay out the amount for insurance premiums and such accordingly. So the companies in these various industries are the ones that we are seeing at the forefront of adopting big data tools and technologies, and these are the industries where we see most number of use cases coming out in the big data era. But what are the problems that they are trying to solve? So some of the major use cases what we have listed, these are some of the implementation of projects that we have done in recent times. So those we have laid out there, but there are a large number of other use cases and implementation that are not shown here. Mainframe migration continues to be a key one, especially in the insurance and banking industry, those that have very legacy system. So mainframe continues to deliver what it delivers. It's good for what it does. But then as the data size grows, and then now that you have open source tools like or ecosystems like Hadoop, we have seen that it can be possible to move your data and application off of mainframe and utilize the massive parallel processing power of Hadoop and do it far more cost effectively, but you need to balance the two. It's very complex. The mainframe in itself is very complex, and when combined with Hadoop, it's really important that you have the right team, right technology in place to do so. But it continues to be a use case of interest for many of the organizations, especially in the banking and insurance sector. Social media analytics, another big use case. As I said, our lives are becoming more and more digital. So for organizations and brands, their customers are talking about them on social media tools today. So they want to make sense of it. They want to see the sentiment of what the customers are talking about their brands. What are the top keywords associated with their brands? Where can we connect better with their customers on social media? And then the other use cases such as security, data governance, product development around big data, around data analytics, and then cluster management. These are some of the major use cases that we have seen that we have implemented in recent times with many of our customers. So now that we have seen that, what are the challenges that organizations face, what are the trends that we are seeing in terms of adoption of big data, what are some of the technologies that companies require for that adoption. Now, how do we move towards implementation? And that's kind of the gist of why MetaScale was formed. We were born out of an enterprise, so we can help other enterprises with their pain points that we have seen within our parent organization and now at many other enterprises as it relates to big data tools and implementation. And the tools will continue to evolve and vary. What is more important is how do you make sense of the large amount of data that's coming to you? How do you really collect that data from various sources and churn out analytics out of it so you can better connect with your customer, grow your business, and improve your brand. So one of the key ones in order to do that is creating this big data center of excellence. It's important that you have the right team in place. And while we are a vendor and we provide resources, professional services to implement various big data projects for a number of companies out there, we see it's really important that you have the right teams within the organization. So our typical engagement with companies are from 2 to 3 years. In that time frame, we actually help organizations build their big data team from outside and within, help them train their resources, and essentially then hand over the project to them. At that point, we see that we want them to be self-sufficient so they can cost-effectively grow an organization within their own company to help manage that big data implementation and get more value out of it. So it's important that you identify what are the right resources. There is a huge demand of big data resources in the market. So again, one, you pay a lot more for hiring from outside, and you may not always get the right resource if you don't have your own big data team in place. So it's important, as Jeff said in one of his final slides, that companies, more than 70% of companies are looking for professional help, and that's where an organization like MetaScale could be very, very helpful to help you get started on identification and identifying the right big data team for you. But eventually, over time, it's important that you have your in-house team in place that can help you grow the use cases, the implementation of those big data implementations. The next one is, if you're just starting, it's important that you consider training. So we have built a number of training programs, including introduction to Hadoop, to data mining on Hadoop, NoSQL, and whatnot. And it's important that the organizations that are in early stage, they actually at least go through the courses such as, executive overview of big data tools and technologies. They understand what it can and cannot do for you, have the realistic expectations around what is it that big data tools and technologies can deliver. It's important they identify what could be the right resources that can be quickly trained into big data tools and technology. So what we suggest is if you have Linux-based resources, that could be a great place to start for you to start training those resources and start building your big data team from within. Next is once you have the team in place, how do you plan your big data implementation? So it's important to identify what is the right physical hardware architecture, what is the reference architecture, what should be the software that supports it, then how do you connect your existing EDW or your existing data warehouse ecosystem with this new implementation? That's the key. That's where a lot of organizations see a ton of issues. How does the data flow between your traditional EDW to big data environment, whether it's Hadoop or NoSQL? What are the costs associated with it? What are the hardware costs? What are the software costs? What are costs associated with hiring the individuals? So it's really important, again, what we do help companies identify various costs, but then that leads to what is the right ROI, what are the right use cases for you to do so. And finally, there are a number of pain points as we initially laid out in one of our earlier slides. There are pain points associated with the ETL, batch processing, security, data governance, getting the buy-in from your senior management and whatnot. And so MetaScale has built its offering to really address these individual challenges. As I said before, we were born out of a large enterprise, and our focus continues to be what are the pain points associated with implementation of big data tools and technology? What are the pain points associated with making sense of this large amount of data that's coming to you? So all our courses, whether it's training, assessing your current environment, doing consulting, or actually doing the infrastructure implementation and management of the same, are really built around that hypothesis. We understand the pain points, we understand we understand the technology, and we think we are the neutral vendor that can help marry the two. So again, as an organization, our focus continues to be using the right tool, primarily open source, and wherever a good open source tool is not available, we have partnered with a number of companies to provide commercial tools to our customers. But we continue to drive solutions based off of the pain points that organizations face. So if you are seeing any of the concerns that some of the checkboxes that are given here, those or any other that are related to growing data volume in your organization, please feel free to reach out to us at MetaScale, and we'll be providing our contact information in the end. So with that, and considering we are towards the end of our webinar, before we jump into question and answer, I again want to thank everyone for joining us today, and Jeff from Wikibon for partnering with us in this seminar.
Thanks, Ankur. Thanks, Jeff. We do have some questions coming in, and again, I remind you to use the chat function to send any questions you have for Ankur or Jeff. We do have a few minutes to run through a couple. Before we do, I just want to let you know that we are recording this webinar, so it will be available following completion today. So you'll be able to review and answer any follow-up questions you have. You'll be able to send those to us as well at contact@metascale.com. But let's just go through some of these questions here. The first one, Ankur, you were talking about building your big data team. What does a typical big data team look like?
It evolves. So initially, so when we talk to a number of companies, we generally start with identifying a use case for an organization, and we think it's really important at that. In that discovery, it's important that you have both businesses and IT working together and identify what are the pain points that you're trying to solve. Are you looking to make better use of your data that's coming from sales, inventory? Are trying to bring these different sources together and make sense of that data. So a number of use cases that we've talked about in several other webinars, so I would not repeat it here. The team evolves. Typically, a combination of a solution architect, an infrastructure architect, a couple of big data or Hadoop developers who have experience in Java and languages like Ruby on Rails, Python, and whatnot, and writing MapReduce code could be a good place to start. But your team will evolve depending on your need and depending on the use cases.
Okay. This next question is kind of a good follow-up to that. What do you need to consider when planning your initial POC?
A number of things. When you're planning your initial POC, first of all, the most important part is the identification of the use cases. So a number of companies we see just want to do something because the senior management attended a big data conference and they saw some promises there, and they want to get value out of something without really defining what the success criteria may be. We really stress to our clients and partner organizations, identify the use case that you're trying to implement. Identify the success criteria. It's important to understand what these big data POCs can do or cannot do for you, and again, be realistic in that POC implementation. So, typically when we do POC with our client, it's a 10 to 25 terabyte environment where we show them success on a sample or an actual big data source, where the large amount of data, say 10 to 15 terabyte data is coming in, and we do some kind of analytics on top of it and such. So it's important, again, identification of the use cases, then bringing IT and businesses together, and then finding the right strategic partner for a company like MetaScale, or if you have in-house talent that can help you implement the use case. So having the right environment in place, having the right connectivity in place, so you don't fail in the first use case or in the first POC, because that POC could lead you to get buy-in from the senior management and have much bigger implementation of the big data tools and technologies.
That's a good point. The next question here, this one's directed to you, Jeff. Are practitioners shifting spending to new approaches like Hadoop at the expense of spending on data warehousing, or are most Hadoop deployments supporting net new workloads?
It's an interesting question. So what we're finding is a little bit of both, but ultimately we believe the majority of workloads on Hadoop are going to be supporting net new applications. What we found talking to Wikibon practitioners and as part of our most recent survey was that 60% of practitioners that have deployed Hadoop have shifted at least one workload from an enterprise data warehouse or even a mainframe to Hadoop. And typically what we're seeing in those cases are moving large-scale ETL jobs from those traditional environments to Hadoop to take advantage of the cost savings and the ability to scale. So in those use cases, those are really finding better efficiencies and saving money type of use cases. But what we think in the longer term, that the majority of applications built on Hadoop are going to be net new analytic applications. The reality is there are a number of reporting, any number of reporting and BI applications that are now running in traditional environments on top of the enterprise data warehouse. And for better or worse, they are supporting important business processes. Whether it's around compliance or other types of issues. We don't think most organizations are going to move those off of existing environments. We think really what they're looking to Hadoop for are some of these net new analytic applications that are taking advantage of new sources of data from both inside and outside the organization, whether it's sensor data, if you're talking about Internet of Things or industrial Internet use cases. If it's more consumer focused, you're talking about social media data. Any other type of third-party data, could be weather data, economic data. When you're talking about those types of applications, and that's where we see really that the real value of big data analytics is when we bring those together to create net new types of analytic capabilities. That's where I think the majority of the applications are going to go. What's happening, however, in terms of specifically to that question around spending, what we're finding are a lot of organizations are trying to, they're not scaling back necessarily on their spend on EDW, but they are trying to kind of put it on hold, freeze it if they can. Essentially, they're getting charged more and more each year as data volumes grow on those systems. So what they're trying to do is kind of put a hold on that, moving some of the excess data into Hadoop and doing some interesting things there. So they're moving a little bit of that money right now, but I think going forward, a lot of it's going to be supporting net new analytic applications.
Interesting. Yeah, that's an interesting dynamic playing out there. Thanks, Jeff. And we got time for one more question. I think it can be a short one here. And I think maybe Ankur, you can answer this, or Jeff, if you want to weigh in as well. But what sort of skills do you develop onshore versus offshore if you're building an offshore model? Ankur?
Sure. So MetaScale has our main office in Chicago, and we have presence in offshore. We have an offshore location in India as well. And what we are seeing as we advise a number of companies on building these big data center of excellences within the organization, what we typically see is you need to find a good combination between the two. The big data tools and technology are new to a lot of organizations, and if they are not using a good strategic partner, they could run into a number of resources, a number of issues. What happens is we typically think if your infrastructure is based here on site, you need to have resources that can manage it from here. So our typical infrastructure team primarily are based at on-site location and could be a backup support team based offshore to provide the 24/7 churn. So typically the infrastructure team, your data governance team, and to a certain extent your solution architect team should be on-site, and most of again your backup infrastructure support team as well as your developer team could all be offshore with a combination of some developers on site, but primarily offshore, so that you can provide this 24/7 code development work and whatnot. That's the mix that we have seen thus far, but it's clearly shifting. It also depends on where you are in your big data implementation maturity model. So if you're in an early stage, you want majority of your team to be on site, which was the case for us when we started within our parent company several years ago. But moving forward, again, to keep the cost low and providing a 24/7 development/management cycle, it's important that you find the right combination of the two.
Okay. And with that, I think we'll end it there. Jeff, thank you very much for joining us and sharing your latest research. Ankur, thanks for sharing trends you've been seeing in the marketplace. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Like I said earlier, we will be posting this on the website, metascale.com. And again, I encourage you to send any additional questions you have to contact@metascale.com. And in appreciation of November being Big Data Strategy Month, thank you all for joining us, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks, guys.